Well, hi there. Warm welcome. You're watching Blueprint Explosive Exclusive, and I'm Meghna Deka. Well, viewers, wedding is generally considered to be a very intimate affair, one that is celebrated with family and your close ones. But in recent times, we've witnessed the explosion of the destination shadi. Yes, the destination wedding. That trend has really picked up. In fact, something which only those with very heavy pockets can possibly afford. Well, there are glam stills which have been coming in of what is going to be the next big shadi of the year. The big fat, well, none other than the Jeff Bezos and Sanchez shadi that we are talking about. One of the world's wealthiest man. He is, after all, going to be tying the knot next week in Venice. Well, the wedding is, of course, going to be one of the most lavish affairs in Venice. It is expected to cost about $10 million. Yes, you heard me right. $10 million to tie the knot. Well, almost every luxury hotel in Venice has been booked by Jeff Bezos, none other than, of course, the Amazon founder. And he has booked several water taxis as well. All of them have been reserved in order to ferry the wedding guests around the city of Venice. Well, Bezos, remember, he owns $500 million worth super yacht has also arrived. A super yacht, imagine, the cost of which is only $500 million. As you can see, this is the scenic beauty of Venice, which is all set to host the big fat shadi of Jeff Bezos. But there is a twist in the tale. People there, the Venetians there, they are divided about his grand wedding plan. Of course, it's scenic enough. It is going to be lavish enough. But before we get you the details of why it has rankled the heads of the Venetians there in this beautiful city, we are going to tell you about the big fat wedding and the opposition that it has been facing. Let's tell you who really has been invited by this power couple, and let's tell you a bit about them themselves. In fact, there you have it on your screens, Jeff Bezos and Lawrence Sanchez. For anyone who doesn't know, let's give you a quick roundup before we tell you about their wedding. He's, of course, the founder of Amazon. She is an award-winning journalist herself. They're all set to tie the knot end of this month. He's the founder of Blue Origin. Remember, the spacecraft, and of course, she was the vice chair of the Bezos Earth Fund as well. And he is the fourth richest man in the world, and she's someone who was part of that all-woman crew of Blue Origin as well. Remember, the likes of Katy Perry were also part of this trip. In fact, let's tell you about the 200-odd guests who are going to be in attendance for this wedding in the scenic city of Venice. Well, let's take you through some of the celebrated faces and names that Venice is all set to now host. You have none other than Oprah Winfrey, you have Kim Kardashian. All of these don't really even need any kind of an introduction. I'm not going to bother you with that. You have none other than Elon Musk. He too is going to be there in Venice. And Katy Perry, someone who was part of the Blue Origin trip with Sanchez as well. Ivanka Trump, the daughter of the first of the US President Donald Trump, is also invited for this plush wedding. However, this is the twist in the tale coming in. The locals of Venice are not exactly happy with this wedding and the fact that it is going to be hosted in their beautiful city of canals. It is happy about the fact, it is not happy about the fact that there are going to be over 200 celebrities descending. Why, you ask? Well, around 300 Venetians have already gathered in the city, and they're protesting against this lavish affair, having a banner which reads that there is no space for Bezos. Well, you can see some of the details which are now coming in as to what their specific objections are to this. They have threatened to block parts of the city in order to send their message. But what really is the reason for their opposition? Well, let me take you through this. Well, the first reason is Venice has been exploited by the ultra-rich. Well, this is the first accusation which has been made by those people who are protesting against them. They've also said that it deepens the residents' exodus crisis, which has already been happening. They also say it's a full takeover of the public spaces by those people who are attending or organizing the wedding. And it's a symbol of inequality and exclusion to have a grand, lavish wedding at this scale, and that leadership is prioritizing tourism over what is good for their own people. In fact, let's tell you how the concerns of the Venetians are coming in from the fact that the celebrated city's local population is now drastically decreasing. with a growing tourist influx being cited as one of the reasons for it. In fact, let's get you some of the numbers, which is going to put it all into perspective. Venice, just for tourists, is the question that we are asking. Well, you had the population in 1950, the population of Venice was around 1.75 lakh. By 2024, just last year, it's dropped all the way across to only 48,000. What's leading to the mass exodus of the Venetians from Venice? The number of tourists here, however, you can see has gone up from 1.25 lakh. It has gone up to 1.5 crore. This is the huge jump from 1.25 lakhs to the crores, and number of Venetians are leaving, the number of tourists have been coming in. So this seems to be a big swap there. Meanwhile, Jeff Bezos, he's not just the first, the most definitely not the last celebrity to have such a grand wedding. Let us take you through some of the big names who have already had these destination weddings in Europe. For example, you have Virat Kohli and Anushka Sharma. Remember, they got married and tied the knot in Tuscany of Italy. You had Ranveer Singh and Deepika Padukone. They got married at Lake Como, which is another one of the very popular wedding destinations of late. You had, of course, none other than George Clooney and Amal, who got married in Venice as well. But remember, this was all the way back in 2014. There were no such big protests per se against them. But this one, however, this wedding is facing a lot of protests. What are the reasons behind that? Let me go across to our panelists to understand what really worries the Venetians. Well, you have Matteo Ferraresi, who's joining us. He's an Italian journalist. Also, we are joined by Dilip Cherian. He is the founder of Perfect Relations. Well, Matteo, I'm going to come to you first. You must explain to us, are these fears genuine for the people of Venice? After all, we all know Venice is one of the biggest tourist destinations. But what if they block tourists? Is that going to hurt the economy or help the ecology?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm a bit surprised by the extent of the protest in Venice because of this. Because, as you mentioned, I think Venice lives off tourism. That's essential to it. I'm not saying that's necessarily a good model of tourism, and the problem with over-tourism is there. But I would argue that having one more wedding for as big as it could be, the Bezos wedding, that's not going to change particularly the whole mechanisms and dynamics of over-tourism in the city. There's many concerns that Venetians have and that I do share personally. For instance, the constant presence of cruise ship. It is a huge concern, I think, from the point of view of the environment and the ability of Venetians to live there. It doesn't look like a Bezos wedding. It's that type of event that really has a lasting impact, and it's worth like such a big protest. What I think, honestly, if I may, is it's perceived also that there are political reasons. Jeff Bezos is clearly perceived as aligning with the views of Donald Trump, and it's perceived like that. And certainly there is an element, I think, that is playing in the fact that some people are angry about this. I would argue that like a number of Venetians and also the institution, of course, will be backing such events that ultimately brings wealth and money even to the people for how critical we could be with that model of tourism. That's what Venice became and is right now.
Well, Venice is, of course, known for its beauty, its canals, but are these canals getting clogged? Not just by the filth which is being left behind, but also by tourists literally jumping in, is what, Matteo, I've been hearing. Is that right, that the Venetian mayor himself has come out and said, I'm very sorry about these protests, it shouldn't happen because it is a great honor. After all, to have people like Jeff Bezos, to have the likes of Oprah Winfrey, to have the likes of Katy Perry, the Kardashians, and of course Ivanka Trump, anyone from the Trump family descending on your city just adds to it, is what the authorities seem to be leaning towards. Are they wrong in that? Matteo?
No, I think it's one drop in an ocean of tourism. It may be a big drop because that event is big, as you correctly described, but it's like a million and millions and tens of millions of tourists per year. This is not what is changing dramatically the model. So once you choose, that's my point, once you choose that Venice is that model of heavily exploiting tourism, which I may be critical of, but that's the decision the city has made collectively, or the authority. Once you decide that, it's not going to be the one Bezos thing that changes dramatically the whole landscape. So I think the authorities are backing mostly events like that, as is the business community there, because they are very, very much aware that their source of income comes from the Bezos of the world, and everyone wanting to make it like a big destination. Why? Because it's beautiful. And they are exploiting, maybe too heavily, their beauty.
Dilip Cherian, how do you stand on destination weddings? Is it good business and bad ecology? Where do we draw the line, and how do we keep that balance?
Meghna, as Mattia just spoke, the business of weddings itself has grown and exploded in the last 10, 15 years with that brief interregnum of COVID. Two, enormously advantages to destinations that are chosen, because there are lots of people who come in the wake of a wedding who want to be going where a couple who they have seen, eulogized about, go.
Absolutely.
I think that, a wedding with 200 guests is, as by Indian terms at least, puny. It isn't even something worth considering as a major source of pollution or anything. Right. Of course, they'll be accompanied by their security and things. My sense is that Venice probably needs to move up the market as far as this kind of wedding is concerned. It is the direction to go. The direction it needs to curb is the vast sea of people who come and don't actually spend too much money in the city and flood it coming off cruise ships. Because, like any business, this is what I call over-exploitation of the beauty of a city. So I think that if Venice is smart, and if it is concerned about ecology, it will probably allow events like this to happen and gradually choke off the extra large cruise ships, because those are the people who probably pay less attention to the sensitive ecology of a fragile ecosystem like Venice is. Each time I've gone to Venice, I've been terrified that will you be able to come back to this city in its current form? And that, I think, much like Bhutan has actually blocked off the kind of traveler who tends to be unsensitive to the ecology or the culture of the place. So also I think Venice needs to understand that lovers of art, lovers of architecture, I'm not trying to create a class distinction here. All I'm saying is that you need to be more picky and choosy who you actually exploit in economic terms.
That's very interesting. Dilip, that's very interesting that you are saying that. In fact, Mattia, that's exactly what Venice has done, hasn't it? After all, it's got a one-day fee which needs to be paid for anyone who wants to spend even a day. It's like a day pass that you need to pay for. Has that worked? Have other cities also done it? For example, we know that Vatican has it, Venice has started, but there are similar demands which were coming in Rome, if I'm not mistaken, last year at least. I'm not sure if they've imposed it yet.
No, they haven't yet, but it is absolutely true that this model is Venice was sort of at the forefront of it. It is working so far in terms of helping the city to make it sustainable, and also to discourage that, as Dilip was saying, the type of tourism that is mostly very, very short and not particularly respectful of the place, of the landscape, of the culture. and you want to have less of that type of tourism, mass tourism based on one-day trips, staying in places nearby, and more moving to the model like that. For sure, having a fee, creating a sort of barrier helps, and I think Venice has been successful in sort of enforcing that. And I would agree with the point that was made before me for how not nice it may sound. I think the only way for Venice to go about this is to really be selective of the type of tourism that you may want to target.
Right.
And in my view, Bezos is exactly the type of tourism. It's like super top-notch billionaires willing to pay, and to pay also to clean after them, like not leaving not a small trace on the environment.
Yes. That's a very important point that you've raised. It's not just about coming here for tourism. When you leave, how will you leave it? And Dilip, here's where I want you to come, because in India, as we all know, there are several destination wedding has become this booming business in India as well. But is this the time for us to already start re-evaluating? What about the checks and balances? What happens, for example, even when it comes to stadiums? You have these big events, stadiums are left in a mess. You have your tourists, you have your sports persons who come out and say, you cannot go around ruining our stadiums. Similarly, you have specific destination weddings across in Rajasthan, down south as well, which have become hubs for wedding tourism. Should the authorities now look at Venice and now decide what needs to be done to have that sustainable balance as well?
You know, I'm glad that Mattia raised that point about sustainability from the point of view of the resident of Venice. Now, first we've got to understand that Venice is a world city. It is an asset to the world. The people who live there are privileged to live there, and we obviously need to look after their interests. But the Bezos wedding, for example, has ensured that 80% of the spend is going to vendors based in Venice. And I think that's a fabulous thing. You know, that's the kind of thing that they should be doing. But in addition, I need to also highlight that just as you asked about the Indian destination weddings, we are actually ruining many of these weddings. And in some cases, though, the fact that prices are pitched so high already makes it semi-exclusive. But the destruction and the inability to clean up after, as they say, tread gently, tread softly, because you don't know what you're crushing. So I think you need to make sure that you provide livelihoods and provide opportunities for locals to live off that, but you've got to compress the scale and not allow big to become bold and just brassy.
Well, you're absolutely right, which is why we are having these conversations today, because look at what's happening in Venice. That could happen and already is happening to many places in India as well. Complaints which have been coming in for Goa, for example, in Udaipur as well. These are cities which have been known for destination weddings. But what happens after the wedding? Well, that's what we need to ensure is going to be a series and rules and regulations when it comes to cleanup, when it comes to crowd control, when it comes to sustainability of the ecology as well. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mattia Ferraresi, as well as Dilip Cherian, for joining us with your views and opinions on this. Without a short break, but hopefully this is going to let you think. Destination wedding, yes, it's a great idea, but exotic wedding should not be exploitative, perhaps. See you.